They were gods, rulers, rebels, and thinkers. Their faces were carved in stone, pressed into coins, painted on scrolls. For thousands of years, they remained silent. But today, we look them in the eye. Using AI and historical imagery, we bring 20 ancient icons back to life, to see them not as myths, but as people. We begin with a face carved into legend, not only by history, but by stone and mosaic. His image, frozen in battle, lives on in the ancient floor of a villa in Pompeii. That mosaic, depicting the Battle of Issus, remains one of the most iconic representations of Alexander the Great. And now, for the first time, we see him alive again. Alexander, king of Macedon, son of Philip, student of Aristotle, god to some, nightmare to others. At just 20, he inherited an army. By 30, he had carved an empire from Greece to Egypt to the edges of India. His conquests weren't just military. He spread language, science, and architecture, fusing East and West in a vision of global rule. But he wasn't a distant figure. He fought at the front. His men followed not because they feared him, but because they believed in him. The mosaic shows him locked in combat, focused, fearless, charging toward the Persian king. No helmet, no hesitation. At 32, his campaign ended, not with defeat, but with death. Sudden, mysterious, no heir, no map, only cities bearing his name and legends carried by time. Now, we look into his eyes again, brought back to life by AI, and we ask, could anyone since ever match that fire? His gaze, carved in marble, still questions us. The Roman copy of a Greek original, now in the National Museum of Rome, captures the philosopher mid-thought, calm, exacting, alive. This is Aristotle, student of Plato, teacher of Alexander the Great, architect of logic. While Plato dreamed of ideals, Aristotle looked at the world as it was. He studied biology, ethics, politics, language, theater, astronomy, and built the first encyclopedia of human knowledge. His method was simple: observe, question, categorize. In a world of myths, he brought structure. In a world of gods, he sought causes. He believed happiness was the purpose of life. Not pleasure, not power, but flourishing through virtue. And unlike his teacher, he didn't reject the material world. He wanted to understand it. He founded the Lyceum, a school of movement, debate, and documentation. His writings influenced the Islamic world, medieval Europe, and the very foundations of science. Logic, rhetoric, ethics, metaphysics. The roots of Western thought grow from his words. Today, we bring him back, not to explain, but to remind. The answers are never final. The questions are still alive. No one alive today knows what he truly looked like. No ancient portrait survives. The busts we have, bearded, bald, solemn, are the product of imagination. Centuries after his death, artists tried to capture the weight of genius. And genius he was. Archimedes of Syracuse, mathematician, engineer, inventor. The man who could turn water, light, and leverage into weapons or wonders. He discovered the principle of buoyancy in his bath and ran naked through the streets, crying, "Eureka!" He calculated pi, defined centers of gravity, and designed machines to defend his city from Rome. Catapults, cranes, mirrors. It's said that during the siege of Syracuse, he begged a soldier not to disturb his diagrams in the sand. The soldier killed him anyway, but his mind survived. In the Renaissance, they called him the greatest mathematician who ever lived. Galileo called him divine. Today, we don't know his face, but we honor it with light. This is the man who gave shape to the unseen. Archimedes, remembered not for how he looked, but for how he thought. We begin with silence carved in stone. This statue from the ancient region of Gandhara shows the Buddha seated, hands poised in teaching, eyes half lowered, robe falling in Greco-Indian folds. It is not a symbol of distance, but of awakening. This is Siddhartha Gautama. And now, for the first time, he returns not in myth, but in memory. Born around 563 BC in Lumbini, a prince of the Shakya clan, Siddhartha grew up in opulence. But sheltered from the world, he saw no sickness, no death, no sorrow. Until, one day, he did. The sight of suffering shattered his palace of illusions. He left behind his wife, his son, his crown, and walked barefoot into the forest, seeking truth. He studied with masters, fasted nearly to death, until one morning beneath the Bodhi tree, he understood. Suffering exists, desire binds, detachment frees. He became Buddha, the awakened one. He did not command armies. He offered questions. He did not build palaces. He built a path, the middle way. From Sarnath to Nalanda, he walked and taught, not of gods, but of mind, not of fate, but of cause, not of death, but of awareness. He died not with grandeur, but in stillness, surrounded by disciples, wrapped in calm. Now he returns, not robed in fire or prophecy, but as a man who looked inward and saw a world waiting to be unbound. And we ask, if liberation begins within, can anyone else truly lead you there? His name is legend, his face, myth carved in marble. The Roman copy of a lost Greek statue, now in the Louvre, shows an old man, blind and wise, with deep-set eyes, gazing into eternity. This is Homer. We don't know when he lived, or even if he lived, but we speak his name because he gave the world its first great stories, the Iliad, the Odyssey, two poems that defined the Greek spirit, shaped Western literature, and survived 3,000 years. His heroes, Achilles, Hector, Odysseus, are more than men. They are ideals, flaws, destinies, struggles. His verses were sung long before they were written, passed from voice to voice, not ink to page. He was not a historian, he was something older, a bard, a vessel, a flame. Some say Homer was one man, others say he was many voices. But the image remains, a blind poet, standing before kings, speaking of gods and monsters, wrath and mercy, war and home. Today we revive the face carved in stone, the man who saw the world with no eyes and helped it see itself. We begin with stone carved into order. On the walls of Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire, stands a figure of quiet control. Bearded, robed, and crowned, his posture is still, but the empire behind him was anything but. This is Darius I, King of Kings. And now, for the first time, he stands before us not in relief, but in life. Born around 550 BC, Darius rose to power after the death of Cambyses II, seizing the throne with both cunning and force. He expanded the empire farther than any before, from the Indus Valley to the Balkans, from the Caucasus to the Nile. But it was not only conquest that made him great, it was control. Darius created roads that spanned continents. He introduced a standard currency, systemized taxation, and divided the empire into satrapies, provinces with governors held accountable. He built the royal road, where messengers could ride, neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness, to bring news across the realm. He oversaw Persepolis, a palace of stone and ceremony, and left inscriptions in 3 languages so all might read his name. He called himself a just king, chosen by Ahura Mazda. But justice in his eyes was also absolute rule. Now, he returns, not as a symbol, but as a sovereign, crowned, composed, a man who held together the world's first superstate. And we ask, is order built through power or belief? We begin with ink and parchment. A miniature from a Persian manuscript shows a man seated cross-legged, a scroll in one hand, a scholar's staff in the other. This is Ibn Sina, Avicenna, the philosopher-physician who lit a candle in the dark. And now, for the first time, we see the face behind the script. Born in 980 in Bukhara, young Ibn Sina mastered the Quran by 10, medicine by 16, and philosophy soon after. By 18, he was treating emirs and writing treatises that would echo for 1,000 years. He believed the world could be understood by reason. He fused Aristotle with Islam, Plato with practice. His mind moved between logic, astronomy, music, mathematics, medicine. His greatest work, the Canon of Medicine, became the gold standard from Andalusia to Samarkand. He mapped fevers and infections, nerves and psyche, hundreds of years ahead of his time. In it, he described illnesses we still name and treatments we still use. But he was not only a healer of the body, he wrote of the soul, the nature of knowledge, the necessity of doubt. He questioned what could not be tested and revered what could be known. Exiled, celebrated, feared, cited. He spent his final days in Hamadan, writing in tents between battles, his lamp dimming but never extinguished. Now he returns, not as ink, not as doctrine, but as a man who searched not for power, but for clarity. And we ask, what survives longer, conquest or understanding? Her face has sparked fascination for over 2,000 years, yet it wasn't a painting or sculpture that preserved her. It was a coin. Struck in silver, worn by centuries, her profile still stares out. Firm chin, hooked nose, determined eyes, a queen, a survivor, a symbol. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, a descendant of Alexander's general, but born into a dynasty in decay. She rose not through inheritance alone, but through will, wit, and sheer force of personality. She spoke 9 languages. She studied science, philosophy, politics. And when Rome came calling, she didn't beg. She negotiated, first with Julius Caesar, who brought her back to power and gave her a son. Then with Mark Antony, who gave her an empire of ambition, love, and war. The world remembers her beauty, but beauty was never her greatest weapon. It was her mind, sharp, fluent, unrelenting. Together with Antony, she fought to hold Egypt against Rome. But the tide turned. Octavian's armies closed in. Rather than be paraded through the streets of Rome in chains, she chose her ending. According to legend, an asp, a venomous snake, delivered her into eternity. And so, the ancient world died with her. Today, we bring her face to life once more, not in silver, but in light. The last pharaoh returns. We do not know the face he was born with, but we remember the face given to him by memory, brush, and scroll. The traditional portrait of Confucius, painted centuries after his death, shows a man of dignity and balance, eyes lowered, brows calm, a presence of wisdom. Confucius was not a king, nor a warrior. He held no armies, he built no cities, but he shaped a civilization. Born in a time of chaos, he believed that harmony came not from force, but from virtue. His teachings on respect, family, duty, and humility were recorded by his students in the Analects. To govern is to be correct, he said. If you set an example by being correct, who would dare be incorrect? He taught that society should be like a family, ruled by elders, guided by ritual, defined by loyalty. Though ignored in his lifetime, His ideas became the foundation of Chinese thought for 2,000 years. Emperors studied him, scholars honored him, and today his image returns, not from marble or monument, but from tradition and light. Confucius, the teacher, the moral compass, the quiet voice that reshaped nations. We begin with a helmet, bronze, scarred, and silent. It tells no tales, but the name behind it echoes through history. Leonidas I, king of Sparta. And at Thermopylae, a mountain pass, became a legend. No true image of him survives, no bust, no statue from his lifetime, but the spirit of his age lives in the stone. We turn to the Critios boy, a statue carved around 480 BC, the very year Leonidas fell. It is not Leonidas, but it is real flesh and stance, carved in marble, echoing the faces of warriors who stood beside him. And now, for the first time, the face beneath the helmet emerges. Leonidas ruled Sparta during a time of gathering storm. When Xerxes of Persia marched with an army said to blot out the sun, Leonidas did not flinch. He took 300 Spartans and a few thousand Greek allies to delay an empire. They held the pass for days. Outnumbered hundreds to one, they fought not for victory, but for honor, for duty, for time. Their deaths were not defeat, but defiance. Enough time for Greece to rally, enough for history to remember. Herodotus tells of Leonidas falling in battle, pierced by arrows, refusing retreat. A warrior king, not carved in marble halls, but in the dust of resistance. And yet, who was he? A man of few words, a product of Spartan steel, a leader who chose to die where others would retreat. He left behind no writings, no speeches, only an act. And that act shaped a myth. Now he returns, not as a relic, not as legend, but as a man. His gaze steady, his silence louder than swords, his body shaped in stone, not as an individual, but as a generation. Freedom is not always won. Sometimes it is simply refused. Her face is one of the most famous in history, and yet we know almost nothing about her. The bust of Nefertiti, discovered in 1912, now in Berlin, captures a queen in perfect stillness, smooth skin, high cheekbones, the iconic blue crown, but no pupils, no gaze, a mystery behind beauty. Nefertiti ruled alongside Pharaoh Akhenaten during one of Egypt's most radical periods. Together, they led a religious revolution, replacing Egypt's pantheon with the worship of a single god, Aten, the sun disk. Some believe she was more than a consort, perhaps even a co-ruler. Her name means the beautiful one has come. But her power ran deeper than appearance. She appeared in royal rituals, issued decrees, and vanished from the records under mysterious circumstances. Was she exiled? Assassinated? Did she change her name and rule in secret? The bust remained hidden for over 3,000 years, untouched, unbroken. A portrait that survived when temples and kingdoms did not. Today, we revive her, not as a statue, but as a person. Nefertiti, the silent queen, the sun's chosen, the face that time refused to forget. We begin with marble and silence. A Roman copy of a lost Greek original shows him with a helmet pushed back, as if mid-thought, not in battle, but in planning. This is Pericles, not just a warrior or orator, but the architect of an idea, democracy. And now, for the first time, we meet his eyes beyond stone. Born around 495 BC, Pericles led Athens during its golden age. He was strategist, statesman, builder, and the voice of a city that dared to govern itself. He oversaw the construction of the Parthenon, a temple to Athena, but also to Athenian ambition. He expanded the rights of citizens. He paid jurors so the poor could serve justice. He turned a fragile system into a vision that still echoes through constitutions. In war, he stood firm. When Sparta attacked, he urged Athenians to stay within the walls, trusting strategy over impulse. He knew that empire is not just land, but law, not just walls, but wisdom. His funeral oration, delivered for the fallen in the Peloponnesian War, is one of the greatest speeches in history. He did not glorify death, but the values of the living. Courage, freedom, responsibility. Athens, he said, was an education to the world. He died not in battle, but in plague. A leader, taken by the crisis, he tried to guide his people through, but his city remembered. Now he returns, not marble, not myth, but man. With thought behind the brow, with vision still burning, and we ask, what does it take to lead not with fear, but with purpose? From the marble halls of the Vatican, his face still watches us. Carved in stone, eyes narrowed, beard flowing. This is Plato, philosopher, student, storyteller of the soul. He was born into war, a child of Athens as it tore itself apart. But from chaos, he imagined harmony. Plato studied under Socrates, and after his teacher's death, he dedicated his life to asking and attempting to answer the greatest questions of existence. What is justice? What is the good life? What is real? His dialogues weren't lectures. They were conversations between equals, between adversaries, between generations. In them, Socrates lived again. Plato founded the Academy, the first institution of higher learning in the West. He taught that the world we see is only a shadow of a greater truth, the realm of forms, eternal and perfect. His student was Aristotle, and through Aristotle, Alexander, and through Alexander, the world. Plato never sought power, but his words became more lasting than laws. 2,000 years later, we bring his image back, not in dialogue, but in light, the philosopher who gave thought its shape. His face was carved dozens of times on statues towering over deserts, temples, and rivers. The colossal head of Ramses II at Memphis is just one of many, and yet it speaks. Calm, proud, eternal. Ramses the Great, the most powerful pharaoh of the New Kingdom. He ruled for 66 years, an age of expansion, diplomacy, and monumental construction. Temples at Abu Simbel, Karnak, Luxor, all bore his name. He fought the Hittites at Kadesh in one of the earliest battles recorded in detail. The result? A peace treaty, the oldest surviving in history. He declared victory, built statues of himself as gods, and fathered over 100 children. But he was more than a warlord. He was a builder, a myth-maker, a symbol of Egypt's golden age. His mummy was found intact, face still regal, hair still curled. Even in death, he commanded respect, reburied in the modern era with full honors. And now, thousands of years later, we bring his image into motion. Not as a god, but as a man. Ramses II Pharaoh. Father. Legend. His face wasn't made for marble, and yet it survived in stone. The Roman copy of a lost Greek original, now in the Louvre, shows a man with a wide nose, bulging eyes, and a defiant beard. Not beautiful, but unmistakable. This is Socrates. He never wrote a word, yet changed the course of human thought. What we know of him comes from others: Plato, Xenophon, Aristophanes, a man who questioned everything. Who are you? What is virtue? What is justice? He asked not to attack, but to expose. He walked the streets of Athens barefoot, unwashed, arguing with anyone who would listen. Not a teacher, a gadfly. In the midst of a crumbling democracy, he was seen as dangerous, accused of corrupting the youth and denying the gods. The penalty? Death. He stood before the court and refused to apologize. Offered the chance to flee, he refused again. The unexamined life, he said, is not worth living. He drank the hemlock, not in weakness, but in principle. Today, we revive not a myth, but a man who spoke truth until his final breath. The first philosopher, the last to run. We begin with a face carved in restraint, not a conqueror, not a king, but a man with laws in his hands and verses in his voice. This is Solon. Athens remembers him not for battles, but for balance. And now, for the first time, the poet-lawgiver returns to life. Born around 638 BC, Solon came to power when Athens stood on the brink. The poor were crushed by debt. The rich clutched power. The city strained at its seams. Solon was elected archon, chief magistrate, and with one sweeping reform, he erased debts, banned slavery for default, and restructured the body politic. But he did not seize power. He did not crown himself tyrant. Instead, he walked away. He left Athens by ship, traveling east to Egypt, to Lydia, to Cyprus. He wrote poetry, not of gods and war, but of justice, balance, and the limits of man. He believed that no law is eternal, that time changes all, and he gave his city the gift of waiting, 50 years before his laws could be altered. I gave the Athenians not the best laws, he said, but the best they could bear. He was a bridge between the world of kings and the world of citizens, between myth and democracy. Now we see him again, not in marble, but in mind, a philosopher in robes, gaze steady, hands weathered by thought. And we ask, can wisdom, once spoken, outlive the noise of power? We begin not with gold, but with clay and stillness. This weathered bust, found in the ruins of Amarna, is not a mask of a god, but a boy, Tutankhamun, Pharaoh of Egypt. And for the first time, we see him not as legend, but as someone who once breathed. Born around 1341 BC, Tutankhamun ascended the throne as a child, likely no older than 9. He ruled in the shadow of upheaval. His father, Akhenaten, had torn Egypt from its gods, its temples, its traditions, and this boy king, crowned too early, was tasked with healing that fracture. He restored the old religion, reopened sanctuaries, moved the capital back to Thebes. But how much was his will? And how much the hands behind the throne? He died around the age of 19. No great war, no lasting reform, just a fracture in his leg, a malaria parasite, a short life swallowed by time. For centuries, he was forgotten, buried deep in the Valley of the Kings, beneath rubble, beneath memory. Until 1922, when Howard Carter broke the seal and found the tomb nearly intact, filled with gold, chariots, games, linen, and silence. And there, the mask, blue and gold, the cobra and vulture, the idealized face of the boy who had become a god. But behind the mask was this, a fragile bust, neck cracked, paint faded, eyes still searching. Now he returns, not as a deity, not as a symbol, but as a human. A youth burdened with power, trapped by legacy, alive for a moment, once more. And we wonder, what dreams were buried before they ever had time to form? Her statues wore the beard of a king, but she was not a king. She was the king's daughter, wife, and stepmother. And then, Pharaoh. The seated statue of Hatshepsut in the Metropolitan Museum shows her in male regalia, stiff, regal, ageless. But behind the granite was a woman of rare ambition and skill. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt not as queen consort, but as pharaoh, the first woman to claim the full throne in her own right. She stabilized the kingdom after years of turmoil. She launched expeditions to the land of Punt, bringing back gold, incense, and animals unknown in Egypt. She built temples, obelisks, and monuments. Most famously, her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, still considered a marvel. For 2 decades, she ruled in peace and prosperity. But after her death, her name was almost erased. Images were smashed, statues defaced. Pharaohs who followed tried to pretend she never existed, but stone remembers. And now, we remember her too. Not just as a figure in male clothing, but as a woman who defied limits. Hatshepsut, builder, diplomat, pharaoh. His face survives not in fantasy, but in raw stone. The Tusculum bust, carved during his lifetime, shows him not as a god, but as a man. Gaunt, balding, tired, sharp. This is Julius Caesar, not just a name in books, but the architect of the world that followed. General, consul, dictator. He conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and wrote his own legend in the language of power. His brilliance wasn't only military, it was political. He knew how to speak to the Senate, to the soldiers, to the people. He rose beyond titles, and when the Senate feared he would not stop, they acted. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, he walked into the chamber, unarmed. Moments later, 23 knives had carved the end of the Republic. Et tu, Brute? His death did not restore democracy. It paved the way for empire. The name Caesar became more than a name. It became a crown. Today, we bring him back from the stone, not as a symbol, but as a person. The weight of ambition, the burden of vision, the face of a man who changed the world. We begin with clay, silent, buried, and watchful. The terracotta army, unearthed from the yellow earth of Shanxi, was never meant to be seen by the living. Among the thousands of warriors, chariots, and horses stands the eternal sentinel of a single man, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. And now, for the first time, he stands before us, in flesh and thought. Born in 259 BC as Ying Zheng, he inherited the throne of the Qin state at just 13. By the age of 38, he had conquered the warring kingdoms and declared a new empire. Not a king, but an emperor. Not a state, but a nation. He standardized weights, measures, coins, and script. He connected roads across mountains, built canals between rivers, and ordered the first Great Wall. But his rule was as feared as it was admired. Books were burned, scholars silenced, dissent crushed. He sought immortality, traveling in search of elixirs, building palaces and tombs that mimicked the heavens. His final resting place remains sealed, a chamber said to contain rivers of mercury and a sky of jeweled stars. His army of clay was not built for conquest, but for eternity. And now, he returns, not as statue or shadow, but as a man reborn, eyes alert, brow furrowed with command. His silence carries a challenge. If you could forge order from chaos, what price would you pay? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. And may the power of history be with you.